the people in that bank were too rich to fail. They said there were too many rich people that had money in there that had paid for influence that started making phone calls and said, you got to fix this. And so we'll fix it. We'll this, we'll that. We're securing the banking system. And well, the banking, that alone, like that problem alone isn't going to, in my opinion, fix it, because all you're really doing is giving everybody a huge safety net to continue to act badly.
Yeah.
Hey, this is Matt Cox, and I am here with Brandon Keys. Brandon has a YouTube finance channel, and we're going to be talking about Silicon Valley Bank. And yeah, check out the video. Oh man, I watched a senator today. I wish I could remember his name. He was talking about Silicon
Valley Bank.
Silicon Valley Bank today. He was grilling people.
Oh yeah.
Today he was, but it was good. But so what happened? Because I've watched. I'm an expert. I watched like 4 or 5 videos. So.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, so Silicon Valley Bank. Let's start off there, right? So I mean, it's based in Silicon Valley, but it has a few branches globally and another one in Boston. And what it's really known for is funding startups. And so what it does, essentially, you can go to Silicon Valley Bank, SVB, get a business loan, or, these startups kind of put their money in this bank, use it to pay their employees, all that kind of stuff. So it was really well known for getting involved in the tech sector, which has been getting crushed lately because of, the recession, the Federal Reserve raising interest rates. And so what they did, they put their money in, how a bank basically operates. They have, they lend out money to people, other creditors and whatnot. And then they also potentially could have like a bond portfolio, which is a quote unquote safe investment.
Right.
But what happens in a bond portfolio is like when you put it in and the interest rates are low, like they were 2 years ago, that bond, you get a short return. And it's like, a 5, 10 year, 20 year, 30 year bond. It gives you like 2 to 3% or something like that. So a very short, small return with a long duration. And those are not very liquid assets, right? It's not like you're owning equity in a company that's like publicly traded or anything like that, and you can kind of buy and sell into it. And so what Silicon Valley Bank did is essentially they would say, hey, we'll help fund your company for some equity at X startup. It's risky. They're not making money right now, but 10 years down the road, maybe they'll make a lot of money, and this equity that we have in here is going to be worth a lot of money, and we could potentially cash out then. And then, on the safe side, we're going to buy all these bonds. And so Jerome Powell and the Federal Reserve has been raising interest rates at basically at a historic pace.
Right.
So, I mean, we just had another FOMC meeting on Wednesday, and they still raised interest rates by 25 basis points, which is like 0.25%. But every meeting prior to that, except for the last one, not this past week, but the one before that, it was 75 basis points every single time for a good period of time. And basically Jerome Powell said it's going to be higher for longer, all this and that. And so what happened to those bond portfolios of Silicon Valley Bank was that they lost a bunch of money. And so these companies that were banking with Silicon Valley Bank, the Fed's raising interest rates, venture capital is a little bit tighter, right? So like, I don't know, Joe Schmo, who has a shit ton of money to invest in these tech startups that, is creating, I don't know, vegan cat food for transgender kids or something like that.
It's going to go over well.
for something like that, that they're creating this, I don't know, some crazy tech thing that's like, maybe it's going to work, maybe it's not. That they're essentially loaning money to them. Then the venture capitalists, after, like I said, the interest rates go up, they're going to be a little bit tighter with their money. They're not necessarily going to lend that out as much. And so because they didn't lend that out as much, that whatever money's in the bank, essentially that company that's creating this vegan cat food for transgender kids or whatever it is, has to go to the bank now to pay their employees and pay the reserves. So they're doing all this and they can't pay back their loans, and their bond portfolio is getting crushed. So simultaneously, Silicon Valley Bank, in order to credit these people and allow them to pay their employees needs to sell their bond portfolio at a loss, and they're losing all this debt, these debtors. So one of the, I guess the bigger names, I can't remember the exact title, who it was, but they tweeted out, like Silicon Valley Bank tweeted out that, hey, we're looking for investors in our bank because, we need that. And they tried to say, like, essentially, like, hey, we're fine. We just need some more investors. Like, everything's fine.
Oh, it's bad. And they took it, and people saw the writing on the wall.
Yeah, I mean, they just basically rang the fire alarm, and everybody was like, oh, shit, like, I'm getting my money out of here as quickly as possible. And so that caused a bank run. So not only did they sell a bunch of stuff at loss, their shares were getting crushed. Everybody took their money out of the bank, it causing them to go bankrupt. And the problem is that the FDIC, which is essentially like the insurance for all these bank accounts, they insure up to $250,000 per bank account.
Right.
Which sounds like a lot of money for an individual person, but if you think about it like a company for 100, 200, 1,000 employees.
Cat food's not cheap.
Yeah, that's
Right.
not a lot of money.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden, you had $1 million in this bank account. You can only get a quarter of it back. And so that's crushing startups and other things like that. But, Silicon Valley Bank is the one that got the most, I guess, publicity because they've already gone bankrupt and they were very risky with their investments. But there's allegedly 183 other banks around the country, like that are quote unquote regional banks, that are having this same issue.
Well, what else went under? Another bank a few days after that one like a week ago, went under too.
Yeah, there's like Credit Suisse is
Right.
one that's like a big name that's getting a lot of publicity behind that too. And I mean, like I said, there's still like a bunch of other ones that potentially could go under. And, what does that all lead to? It leads to like more regulation and more kind of eyeballs on all these things.
So
and
Biden came in and said, don't worry, we're going to insure every dollar in the bank and everything will be good.
Yeah. And so what does that cause, right? So, I mean, Jerome Powell is supposed to not be, and the Federal Reserve is not supposed to be influenced by any of this stuff, right? They're supposed to be just like looking at the overall economy. They're supposed to be in charge of creating a healthy banking sector. So, they've kind of gone through these meetings saying that they're going to raise interest rates for a long time, higher for longer. They're going to have more unemployment because essentially we've had skyrocketing inflation. Like, I mean,
Right.
The last CPI print, which is how the Fed kind of reports it, was over 6%. And, every year the target is 2%.
Right.
And, it's 6% as low as it's been in the past, 6 or 9 months or something like that. It's been over 10% and all that in the U.S. And, if you're living your everyday life, you know that inflation is over 6%, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah. You can go to the grocery store and come back and like
Your
and
grocery
just
bill,
go,
yeah.
Jesus God Almighty, I got less groceries and spent 30% feel like I spent 30% more money and got less stuff than I typically get. Like it's outrageous.
Exactly. So the statistics that they're reporting for the CPI, it essentially changes every 4 to 5 years or something like that. And so they just recently changed it again in I think it's going to affect either in March or May. I can't remember off the top of my head, but it's getting changed again this year on how they're reporting the quote unquote basket of goods for CPI. And so all this to say, this has basically influenced how now the Fed is looking at things, and Powell kind of had a meeting, and he was very wishy-washy on what he's going to do in the future. And so, I mean, this causes a bunch of market manipulation and other things like that, and it's, causing President Biden to now come out and say, like, hey, you can't keep raising interest rates because, you're going to kill all these banks. When in reality, these banks just didn't really allocate their funds properly. I mean, like, if you're looking at a risk management portfolio for all of what these guys did, I mean, it doesn't take like a finance guy or a genius to be like, all right, dude, like, what the fuck are you doing here,
Right.
kind of thing.
Like you weren't using reasonable underwriting guidelines to lend this money out. But
Yeah.
once again, everything was going up.
Yeah,
Like
exactly.
we talked about in the last video, like they start thinking, oh, we can't lose. Like
Yeah.
we're doing great.
Well, I mean, like what I say is when the interest rates are low, they're at like 0% for like 10 years. When that's the case, dumb ideas don't die. I mean, like you could just
Right.
like I said, like vegan cat food for trans kids, or like even like FTX and like some of these crypto things where it's like put in this money, all this staking is fine. Like, there's nothing behind it, but, we're just coming up with these random ideas, and they're shooting up from companies that were non-existent, and then within 2 years, you have a multi-billion-dollar valuation. Like, that just doesn't make any sense. And that's kind of the environment that we were in, and these banks were just lending to all these companies, just putting a bunch of marketing dollars behind it. And, these companies shot up on huge valuations. So the bank's dancing for joy. And then now all of a sudden, inflation's sky high, and the Fed's like, all right, well, we got to pull back the reins a little bit. And, the companies are getting fucked. Therefore, the banks are getting fucked. And the end consumer is the one that's left holding the bag.
So I love that. Don't worry, we're gonna pay that money. We're gonna cover those losses out of this fund that's been set aside. You mean the fund that's funded by it's funded by the banks, right? And the banks pass that on to the consumer. So it's like ultimately the citizens of the U.S. ultimately end up bailing them out.
I mean, it's gonna be our tax dollars that's gonna be paying it, right? They've already claimed I think it was hire 80,000 more IRS agents,
right.
And when it comes down to it, the people who are getting audited are not the
80,000. The Republicans crushed that. By the way. They're not hiring 80,000 more.
Yeah, I know, but they're trying to do stuff like that.
Yeah.
So
what I was gonna say is and I get it, because the argument is the let's say you had $2 million in this bank account. It's only FDIC insured up to $250,000.
Yeah.
And they're like, look, it's, one, you've got some people are arguing, hey, those are rich people. They should have diversified more. They should have thought about it. And then, of course, some people are saying, hey, those are bank accounts that money is actually going to go to pay individuals that work at companies. And, that's horrible, too. Those companies will go under. Okay, well, those companies are probably going under anyway.
Yeah.
To me, I could see going in and saying, to the government, look, if this is a corporate bank account and this is money that's allocated to pay your employees, we'll help fund that, and you can pay us back with we'll give you a very generous loan, but we're not going to bail out everybody across the board that had money. You know what? I know what FDIC insurance is. I know how much is covered. You knew how much was covered. You know if you're opening this company and you're making a stupid product, and but by now that this is risky. You know what's going on. You're going under. You can hold out hope that nothing bad's going to happen, but you invested in this company, you borrowed money, you've got money in the bank account, it's only got up to $250,000. The bank goes under, you lose the money.
Yeah.
Now, I understand if that's for your employees, well, then fine, we can work with that, we'll come up with something, but I wouldn't go bail everybody out. That doesn't even make sense, because if it was a bunch of poor people that had money in there and they weren't related to rich people, I don't think they would have bailed them out. Tons of regional banks go under all the time that they don't bail out.
Yeah.
So it seems like, and I only say this because I watched a video that they were talking about the people in that bank were too rich to fail. They said there were too many rich people that had money in there that had paid for influence that started making phone calls and said, you got to fix this. And so we'll fix it. We'll this, we'll that. We're securing the banking system. And the banking, that alone, that problem alone isn't going to, in my opinion, fix it, because all you're really doing is giving everybody a huge safety net to continue to act badly.
Yeah.
He's been known to cure insecurity just with his laugh. His organ donation card lists his charisma. His smile is so contagious. Vaccines have been created for it. He is the most interesting man in the world.
I don't typically commit crime, but when I do, it's bank fraud. Stay greedy, my friends.
Support the channel. Join Matthew Cox's Patreon.
No, 100%. And I think, if what we saw out of the 2008 crisis, right, is that the government came in and bailed out a shit ton of companies, right? And at the end of the day, not all those companies were great companies.
Right.
And so,
but I think that's different. That was way more.
Yeah.
That was affecting individual homeowners across the entire country, which were also stupid, by the way.
Well,
you bought 4 houses.
Yeah.
You bought 4 houses to rent out. You don't know what you're doing. You knew you didn't apply for, you knew you didn't qualify for these loans. So in some ways that's stupid, but also, so if you actually go and look into it, remember when they did that and everybody was saying that the government's going to end up owning all these banks? They didn't.
Yeah.
And that we'll never see that money back. Man, like 92% or 95% of all the TARP funds were paid back.
Yeah.
Almost all of it was paid back. So you had these people, it's cats and dogs, raining from the sky, and it's horrible, and it's Armageddon, and we're going to be communists or socialists, and none of that happened. So, I get it. But that was different. Like the whole financial structure, the whole financial system was crashing.
Oh, 100%. Well, I mean, like what I think too there is like you said, that was like different because it was housing, right? I mean, this, like, you're messing with people's like jobs and like other things like that, like how they're making a living essentially.
Right. But this wasn't millions of people's jobs, and they could have come up with a better plan.
But I mean, all right. So SVB, it's one bank, right? I mean, like I said, it is almost seeming like it's a contagion, and this is just starting. And that's the scary part about all of this is that, it's come out, like I said, 183 others that could potentially be like that. And, the way the banking system is set up is there's really like 4 big dogs, and then there's a bunch of regional banks. And so, like, what my fear is essentially that, all right, one of these 4 big dogs is now going to bail out Silicon Valley Bank. And then, these 183 other guys are then going to get swallowed up by these 4 guys.
They just basically mega banks, right?
Mega banks. And then what happens when you have a mega bank, right? There's less touch points of entry. And then if the government wants to come in and do something or make some sort of regulation, you don't have to go searching for, this guy has a regional bank in Tennessee's First Bank, and then he has a Chase Bank account, then he has, Capital One, then he has an offshore one. It's like, well, you only got 4 options now.
Yeah.
And then you could go to one of these and just, cut somebody out like that, or, you need a loan. Well, like, I don't really like what you said on this video. This one bank cut you out. I don't really like,
right.
I don't know, your views on this. Like, what? Like, I mean,
it's almost impossible to build a relationship with a bank that you mean nothing to. So you can't, with a small regional bank, you can build a relationship where you can, they'll give you some leeway here. They'll understand your small business. Like, I understand, here's what happens with him. So sometimes he needs cash flow and sometimes this, but he's good for it. He's been in the community for 10 years. I know the guy. I went to high school with the guy. Like, he's good. Always been good. We have a good relationship. You can't get some guy in New York City who's a member of a mega bank to pay attention to some little guy live in Temple Terrace, Florida, who's trying to get a $100,000 loan to
open a restaurant or something like that.
Right.
Like, I mean, it's 100% that's the case. And then, that guy in New York, all right, who does he know? Maybe some young, ambitious kid who's going to start the next FTX or, some of this, like, stupid vegan cat food thing. And they're
$400 million to invest in something stupid and ridiculous.
And then it's like, okay, well, I'm going to this thing has the potential to boom. And, like, all right, this little restaurant here in Temple Terrace, all right, like, maybe, sure, you'll make a couple $1,000s a month.
Right. Yeah, but they don't want, yeah, right. Exactly. So they want to lend the big money that's going to have big potential. Hey, I have a question for you.
All right.
And I already know you didn't read this. This is so disappointing. I'm already disappointed. And just asking, just the idea of the discussion. Did you ever read the book, Jennifer Government?
No, I didn't.
So sad. Did you? I know you did. I did. I forget it. Listen, Jennifer Government. I'm amazed that Jennifer Government never became a movie. It was so. And you don't probably remember this, but there was a time, because you're in your 20s.
I'm a young gun, man. What can I say? I don't know.
There was a time when kids were shooting each other over Nikes, over Nike tennis shoes.
Well, okay? Jordans, right?
Jordans, Nike, right. So this person, so this was happening, right? This person, so 1984, like we were talking about, is essentially it's like kind of like communism, gone wrong, right?
Yeah.
Like, in this is capitalism gone wrong, and it's basically the elimination of taxes. And so you have that the guy, he breaks up the map. It's a guy named Max Berry. He breaks up the map where he explains to you, like, Europe's kind of socialist, then you basically have socialism and you have capitalism, and there's a few communist countries. But the capitalists, like it's the United States, part of Australia, like it's got this whole world order thing. But capitalism has gone to such an extreme that if you go to work for Nike, right?
Yeah.
Your name is now Brandon. Your surname is now Nike. You're now Brandon Nike. If you're unemployed, it's Brandon Unemployed.
Oh man.
It's Matt State Farm. It's
Yeah.
Whatever. It's Matt Allstate. I work for Allstate, so it's Matt Allstate. Let's say.
Yeah.
And it starts off where Nike comes up. The book starts off with Nike comes up with something they call, it's like a guerrilla marketing plan, and they say, here's what we're going to do. We're going to advertise these new Nike tennis shoes they're called Mercuries, and they're going to sell them for $1,500 a piece.
Oh shit. Yeah.
And we're only going to make 1,000 of them. But really, they've made 40,000 pairs.
Yeah.
And they say we're releasing 100 pair at this store in the mall. This is back when there were malls.
Yeah. Back when people would wait in line
Right.
for these things. Yeah.
So people are waiting in line, but they're not going to release 100, by the way. They actually send 1,000 to the store.
Yeah.
So people will get lots of them. What's happening is people go out and they're spending by the way, they explain that the shoes are being made in China for $2.50 a piece.
Yeah.
So they got $2.50 a piece. They're selling them for $1,500, and people are buying them so they can resell them for $2,500.
Yeah.
But Nike essentially just blows this out, and the way they get street credit is they hire someone from the NRA, because there's the police force who only investigates crimes if you pay for it. So if your wife gets murdered and you want someone to find it, then the government comes to you and says, look, it's going to be $45,000 to fund it. So if you fund it, you can refinance your house, get a loan. We'll investigate. We have a 97% conviction rate. We will find these people. But what happens is they release 100. There's really like 1,000 of these shoes or 500 of these shoes. They're releasing it at Nike Town in East Lake Mall. People are lined up, and in order to build street cred, they hire someone from the NRA to shoot and kill the first 5 people that buy Nikes and steal the shoes and run off. And that will build street cred. People will be like, oh my God, people are shooting each other for these shoes. Yeah. They're definitely worth it. And so they do. They have some guy, he shoots 4 or 5 people, grabs a couple pair of Nikes and runs off. And and one of them's like a young girl. She ends up dying. And eventually the parents they go to the government to investigate, and they go to Jennifer Government. She works for the government.
Yeah. And
she investigates the whole thing. And if you really, like, there are companies like, let's say a Shell Corporation. Like Shell Corporation, when you talk about espionage, it's on a whole nother level.
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking about corporate espionage on a where they literally have their own like military. And they've got gangs which are McDonald's. They'll tattoo McDonald's on like their neck or something. The McDonald's, and then they'll have another guy. There'll be another gang. Will be the Burger King gang.
Oh man!
And so the Burger King gang's hanging out in front of the McDonald's. Guys are trying to go into the McDonald's. They're like, yo man, where you going?
Yeah, why aren't you going to Burger King?
Oh, you going to McDonald's? And like they're getting into a huge fight. And
yeah.
It sounds ridiculous, but when you read the book, I read it 2 or 3 times. I mean, it's so overwhelmingly good, because when you read it, the things that happen in that book, they had taken things that happened that were happening in society. Yeah. It was written by a guy. The guy, he wrote Syrup. Anyway, I think he's Australian, and he wrote this book. And it takes things to an extreme, but some of the things that you read about, you realize, like, that's happening. These things are happening. Like, this was 20 years ago. This is happening now.
Oh, 100%.
It's insane. And I really, when I read it, I thought, this would make an amazing movie.
Yeah. I mean, like, we were kind of talking about this a little bit before, right? Like 1984 stuff. Like, you never really thought that this would, like, I mean, this was supposed to be some, like, thing for entertainment.
Right.
Like, it's way out there. And, like, we're getting closer to that than you really think, right? I mean, if you read the Communist Manifesto and you kind of go through, like, I think it's like 10 of the different whatever things of communism, if you really look at it pretty deeply, like, the United States probably checks like 7 or 8 of those boxes. Like, we're getting pretty close to it.
Right.
I mean, like, sure, we're not as bad as maybe like Russia or China or some of these other places, but you know, the whole like land of the free thing, we're not really there anymore.
No.
I mean, people are getting censored, right? I mean, like,
yeah, I would say it's really, listen, the United States has the best marketing campaign ever invented in history. I mean, the whole slogan of the home of the brave, land of the free, home of the brave, like we have more incarcerated. We have what, 5% of the world population. We have 25% of the total incarceration of the entire world. 1 out of every 100 people is on some form of incarceration in the United States. That's 1 out of 100. I mean, it's you start doing the numbers and it's insane. Can you have guns? Sure, some people can.
Yeah.
Like, I can't. And it's super regulated. Like, there's so many things that have veered off from the Constitution. When I was arrested, I was being interviewed by the FBI. There was this chick there named Candace Calderon. She was a chick. She was an FBI agent. And we were talking, and I remember she said, well, we were talking about somebody, and she said, well, she won't talk to us. And I went, well, I said, she doesn't. It's not like she has to talk to you.
Yeah.
And I said, and she goes, what do you mean? I said, well, I mean, doesn't the Constitution say, like, you self-incrimination, like, you don't have to incriminate yourself. You certainly don't have to answer questions from law enforcement. And she said, and I go, I'm pretty sure that's in the Constitution. And she goes, well, that document was written a long time ago. And I looked at my lawyer and I go, we're still using it, aren't we? Yeah. And my lawyer said, some of it. She goes, some of it. And I just, the look on this chick's face, I just remember thinking, like, you're trying to say that this person is guilty. That was a bit, the spirit of the conversation was, I believe this person's guilty because she won't talk to me, and I want to indict her.
Yeah.
And I was saying, one, she didn't do anything wrong, which, by the way, is not what I said about anybody else that I was talking about. But I was saying this person has not done anything wrong. And two, she doesn't have to talk to you. And she was saying, by not talking to me, I think I should add her to what they wanted to be an indictment. And it was like that's not right. Like, no. You can't, but she was like, yeah, the Constitution is like, that's an old document. Like, it was like, I'm pretty sure that's the foundation of what this country's built on. And that's what I thought at the time. I don't believe that now. Like, I now know that
I mean, you went through the system. If anybody knows, it's you, right?
Yeah. I mean, I say the nicest thing about going through the system is that I was extremely guilty.
Yeah.
So anything that happened to me, I really had to blame myself. But I've seen I've seen people in prison that made the mistake of getting indicted and then thinking that they were innocent or not wanting to accept the fact that the government said they were innocent and went to trial, and instead of getting 18 months in prison, ended up with 15 years or 10 years. Or the disparity between taking a plea and going to trial is the most unfair part of the system. Like, you offered me 18 months, I go to jail I go to trial and I lose. I see that. I think the disparity should be a few years. Like, maybe I get 2 or 3 years now. Yeah. I should have taken the 18 months. I got 3 years because I went to, but it's not.
Yeah.
You offered me 18 months.
I get 10.
I get 12 years. Yeah. 10 or 12 years. And you're like, that's insane.
Yeah. It's like literally like 10 times the amount.
Right. And it doesn't do anything, by the way. All that is for the public. Because the truth is, if you sent that person to 3 years, their life has been so overwhelmingly devastated by that 3 years. The extra 7 or 8 years doesn't change anything. It doesn't do anything but just cost the taxpayer more money and make them feel like, yeah, that was justice. But the truth is, if you really sat down and looked over everything and what this person had done, the average person in society would say, yeah, I'm sorry, man, he doesn't deserve 10 years.
Yeah.
That's why, by the way, I don't know if you know this or not, the jury in a criminal case is only allowed to determine guilt or innocence.
Not the amount of time.
They have no idea what you're even facing. Most jurors, if you ask them, hey, so you just found this guy guilty for fraud. Like, yeah, right.
Yeah.
So what do you think he's going to get? Oh, probably probation. Somebody else might say, no, I think he's going to go to jail for a couple of years. Yeah. And then they find out 3 months later, they read the paper and find out the guy got 15 years.
Yeah.
And they go, I didn't know he's facing 15 years. I would have never found him guilty. Exactly. They can't let you know. The only time a jury is allowed to know what you're facing is if the death penalty is involved. That's it.
Wow.
So if you're potentially could get the death penalty, they have to let them know, by the way, if he's found guilty of this charge, he may be subject to the death penalty. That's it. They won't even tell you he will get it just because he may, because the judge determines that.
Yeah. Judge has a shit ton of power.
Yeah.
Law enforcement often questions him, not because he's suspected of a crime, but because they find him fascinating. He is the most interesting man in the world.
I don't typically commit crime, but when I do, it's bank fraud. Stay greedy, my friends.
Support the channel. Join Matthew Cox's Patreon.
That's
So-
ridiculous.
So anyway, that was my rant. Anyway, sorry. Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
I mean that's all fair, but I mean it brings us back to the point, right? Like things aren't exactly as they appear when it
Yeah.
comes to like everything, right? So I mean whether it's big government, whether it's, the banking system, like you think you put your money in the bank and it's safe, right? I mean like but what you don't realize is everything that you do at this point with your money, unless you're like hiding it under a mattress, I mean, even hiding it under a mattress is a risk, right? Because like you're losing your money when it comes to inflation. You're losing your money, if you park it in a bank account because, you get like 0.5 or even 2% or 2.5% and the inflation's 6.
Right.
So, I mean, you're
Yeah,
losing whatever the spread is
that
every
value,
single
it's-
month. And yeah, so I mean, like, people have just been kind of, I guess, privy to jump into these scams and like just trust people and like think like, hey, I don't know, this sounds like a good idea. Like this person has fabricated their numbers or whatever, so it looks like it's a lot better than it is.
Lindsay
But-
Lohan said it was
Yeah.
a solid investment.
I mean, they said it was a good, this, poopy dog coin or whatever it is a good investment and it's going to go to the moon. So through all this, it's been funded by these banks who have just had the easy ability to just loan to whatever the fuck they want. And then they're like, oh, well, we'll buy these bonds that will give us 2 to 3% back. Well, now the interest rate's at like 5%. So you're losing cash like crazy. And so, I mean, like at the end of the day, it's just been this perfect cocktail that's just like killing like all these stupid ass companies that have gotten people to believe like, hey, I'm going to be the next Jeff Bezos and create the next, I don't know, Amazon
Right.
for whatever it is, or I'm going to create the next Uber for this, or I'm going to create, the next whatever it is. And so, yeah, like I said, when the interest rates are low, dumb ideas never die. And that's just kind of the environment that we've been in. And so what has Jerome Powell kind of had to do? I mean, we like forced his hand essentially to raise interest rates at a skyrocket pace because, I mean, hindsight's always 20/20, but he probably should have been doing this a lot earlier.
Yeah.
And so we're into this situation now where, like we said about 2008, essentially we're going to have to bail out like a lot of these banks. And so they've talked about already injecting like $2 trillion into the system.
More inflation than.
Yeah, and I mean, like it's going to be a really interesting environment to see what we decide to do. Right, so the market essentially the market is very forward facing. And so the market has already priced in 100 basis points of rate cuts by the start of next year. So, take that for what it is. But, it's like I said, every single meeting they've been raising, and Powell has been saying before this past one that they're going to keep raising and raised throughout 2023. Well, now the market's like pricing in like, hey, you're going to have to reverse course on that and inject a shit ton of money back into the system. Well, what's that going to come out of? Either the banks are going to get swallowed up by those 4 big guys, or, the president now has the power to say like, hey, we bailed out the banking system because you guys were idiots. So now we're going to put more regulation on you to kind of come to your help and come and kind of save you.
Right.
Or, and then the end consumer is going to be stuck holding the bag with a shit ton of inflation. They're going to either get taxed out the ass or lose their jobs. And, we're going to have to bail out these banks who are investing in this vegan cat food for trans kids.
Right.
And, it's all like kind of just goes back to the end consumer. And, the rich people are going to swallow up hard assets like real estate, gold, and like maybe invest in some of these smart companies like an Apple or an Amazon that are already kind of proven instead of jumping in. Or maybe they even have enough liquidity to jump into some of these stupid ideas. Well, hey, the interest rates are going down, and then they can, ride that wave up and then jump out at the top because they know some idiot's going to buy this super stupid fucking dog token or whatever it is. So, I mean, we just get into this never-ending cycle where the rich get richer, the poor get poorer, and that gap in between gets larger. And what does that do? It leaves the people that are at the very bottom of the overall economic system to say, like, hey, like, this is fucked up. We need some help. Government, come and help me. And what does that leave them? That leaves the government with a just extreme amount of power where they'd be like, all right, well, we'll help you,
Well, eventually that you got 4 or 5% of owning 80% of the wealth, and then you've got everybody else who's just poor. Well, at some point, that whole crowd says, you know what we're going to do? We're just going to go take it from all you rich people.
Yeah.
Like that's just communism. It's a communism revolution, and that's what, like, ultimately that's what happens. And I think, I don't know. Did you ever see? Have you ever watched *Handmaid's Tale*?
No, you're bringing up all these things I haven't
Bro,
seen.
you've got to see *Handmaid's Tale*. Have you seen that? Forget it. *Handmaid's Tale* is amazing.
All right, I gotta watch all
God,
this. Yeah,
it's so great, and it's really, listen. It was written back probably in the 50s or 60s, but it's like apropos for what's going on because they tie in all these things about the religion. They tie in global, like climate change. They tie in like just all kinds of stuff, and it seems good on this whole thing too. Like, oh, what do you do?
I mean, so like the way I think, I mean, it's essentially like it's all revolved around this whole fiat dollar system, right? I mean, the government has so much control over the inflation, the dollars, like whatever. And so what the theory is like the fiat monetary system, it inflates by 2% every year. Well, our efficiency, and as hard as we work, is supposed to grow by more than 2% every year. Well, that doesn't necessarily happen, right? I mean, maybe with tech, it happened for a little bit, and that's why we saw a little bit of a boom. But, like, right now, are we more efficient than we were, like, 2 years ago? Are we 10 times more efficient or, 10% more efficient than we were last year? I wouldn't say so.
No.
And because of that, that just causes, it causes like somebody my age, right? If I am dating a girl or something like that, we decide to get married, right? Now we both have to work a 2-income household. We have to put off having kids later. I mean, it's like this never-ending cycle of just like, killing the traditional family where, you can't have necessarily kids. And like that's why you're seeing people my age get married a lot later, not have kids until their mid-30s,
right.
And then that causes some sort of, there's higher risks when you have kids later in life. And so it's like, I mean, like the family's one issue, right? I mean, like the personal freedom, people are going to be retiring a lot later. You're going to have to be supporting your grandmother or your parents a lot later in life.
Well, the system is designed to grow. It's designed to continually.
Yeah,
it's not like you say, hey, there's 300 million people, and we're gonna maintain society this way, and unless you had a completely planned society of some type, but our society is set up to continually get bigger and bigger. And it's like the thing that's happening in Japan, China. Like you've got a whole segment of society that's just missing.
Yeah.
And then you've got all these people getting old and nobody to take care of them, and so that's going to be a major problem in 10 years or 5 to 10 years. It's going to hit China so hard. They got like 30 years of people just of a group of people.
Yeah, gap.
Right. This gap that should be working is gone.
Yeah. And then what do you do?
Right.
I mean, like then it's like, all right, well, the government's got to come in and control all this stuff and help out. So I don't know. I mean, I think like at the end of the day, a lot of these banks, like what we need to hope to see is that like Silicon Valley Bank and like Credit Suisse and some of the bigger names that have already failed are like the last cog. and that, the Federal Reserve kind of holds true. In my opinion, I think that if they, kind of keep their foot down and don't necessarily inject all this liquidity in there and don't have to bail out all these big guys, and hopefully these big four banks only swallow up a couple. Like, if all these things happen, then we'll be able to come out the other side a little bit better. But, I mean, not to be doom and gloom on this whole thing, there's just a lot of shit going on and shit's hitting the fan where it's like kind of the perfect cocktail where, I mean, it's almost like inevitable that if we're not already in a recession, we're probably going to get there in the next year or so. And, we've been in an economic time where it hasn't necessarily been solid for the past year. Like, people look at, point at unemployment's at like an all-time low. Well, I mean, the Fed's like pointing that this needs to raise and, some other things like that. So I think like just the amount of control that the government and other people have when it comes to like the monetary policy is what's going to be, America's detriment in the end. Like, we've been so lucky and blessed to live in America where we've had the global reserve currency since 71 and like basically like the powerhouse where we need to go bail out all these people, and like we have the strongest military and all this and that. Like, I don't really think countries are afraid of America anymore or look at America as like this all big power. I think like, we're starting to see a lot of cracks in that armor, and, Silicon Valley Bank is just like an aftermath effect of all of that, where people are kind of like grasping at straws and trying to, make America and like these companies and all this other things like fabricated look a lot better than it actually is. Kind of my viewpoint on it. Like, I hope shit doesn't hit the fan, but I
don't think continually bailing out people or bailing out bad behavior is, like I think lend them the money or, like, and as far as, I think there's other ways to fix the issue than just continually bailing them out.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that and like banks need to be smarter with how they're lending. They need to have more stringent processes and things like that too. And I mean,
listen, in China, they'll just take them out and shoot them. First of all, this is not getting monetized. You've mentioned transgender multiple times. I've mentioned China. Like, there's a problem. There's gonna be a problem.
Well, I mean,
Colby's gonna be like, what are you doing, bro?
That's part of the problem though, right? I mean, like, you can't. It's not a freedom of speech platform. You know? I mean, it's controlled. It's controlling the narrative at the end of the day.
Thank God we didn't mention COVID.
Yeah, I mean.
So yeah, it's. So yeah, we've mentioned the porno chick.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, it's over. This is a horrible video for me.
My bad, dude. I'm sorry about that.
Yeah, I think that I think bailing people out over and over and over again. Sometimes you just have to let a nice little chunk go under, or listen, in China, they just take the executives out and shoot them take them out in the park and just shoot them in the head. Like do you remember? Listen, this was 30 years ago that China was selling dog food. Like, they were just kind of starting to become a major powerhouse, right?
Yeah.
And one of the things they were doing, they were selling like dog food. And the dog food manufacturers put some kind of a filler in the dog food, and hundreds of dogs were dying in the United States.
Oh my God!
And so they took the CEOs out of the place and just shot them in the head, executed them, like because and the way they looked at it was, look, like your stupid decision just cost our country tons of jobs, money, everything. No, and here's how we're gonna let other people in running these companies know.
Yeah.
We'll shoot you in the fucking head. And they just took them out and shot them in the head, and that was it. It was over. So, I think if they take these, the problem is, in this country, you've got civil and criminal, and these guys, like, have they done anything criminal? I'll tell you what, the FBI they'll find something you did criminal.
Yeah.
So,
well, I mean, too, I think it's like some people that are getting loaned like hundreds of thousands of dollars. Like, take student loans, for example, right? I mean, you're going to go do student loans and get some like gender studies major. You get $250,000. You go to some liberal arts college, $250,000 in debt by the age of 22 or maybe even 25 or whatever. You took a long time to graduate because you changed majors and all that. You're making 40, 50 grand a year. You're never going to pay that money back.
Right.
And then what we've been doing to kind of, I don't know, put a Band-Aid on it is like, all right, President Biden has been like, all right, I'm not going to charge any interest on your student loans like now, or, they keep pushing it back. I think the next time they're going to make the decision is in July.
And then they were going to forgive them.
Yeah.
There's tons of What does that say for the people that borrowed the money and paid it back?
Well, I mean, they were going to forgive up to like 10 grand, but the thing is that 10 grand that they were going to forgive up to people is they were going to tax that 10 grand on you. So you take that 10 grand that, I don't know, you have a $100,000 loan. Now it's 90,000. Well, we gave you 10 grand. So you're going to have to pay 2,500 of that as taxes because we gave that to you.
Right.
So it's like kind of like a backhanded thing that they were going to do with all that. But essentially, like, they've stopped the interest payments on student loans for now. And majority of student loans are lent out by the government. And so majority of people just haven't been paying that. They've just been like, hey, the government, maybe they're going to bail us out eventually and not make us pay it. But when those the payments start knocking and you have to get paid or you have to start making those payments, that's an extra, I don't know, $250, $300, $400 that people haven't had to pay for the past 2 years.
Yeah.
So what's going to happen when that floodgate opens?
And you're teaching high school for $40,000 a year.
Yeah.
Because your degree really doesn't pay you anything because it's gender studies or something ridiculous.
Yeah, you're a math teacher at a high school in a small town where,
you're making $35,000.
Yeah, and on that note, too, I mean, you're making $35,000, and then your grocery bill has gone from $100 to $200, and, like, everything around you has gone up, your rent's gone up and everything like that, and we're like, all right, I get this break on this $300, $400 payment. For a few years. Then it opens up, and then now my rent went from $1,000 a month to $1,500 a month, and now on top of that, I have a $400 student loan payment that I got to make.
Right.
I mean, like, we've seen basically credit card interest skyrocket, interest like our loans on credit cards or whatever you want to call it. I can't think of the proper term right now. That's credit card debt skyrocket, and we've seen personal savings go like at an all-time low.
Right.
And so we're basically like just cooking up for a recession, and it's like all these things are just kind
you don't
of
think
starting
we're in a recession?
I personally do.
Yeah.
I do.
But
But
just because the White House
some
says it's
financial,
not.
some
Just
financial
because they
bro,
move the numbers.
Yeah, some financial bro is gonna tell me that I'm an idiot because
Yeah.
I'm not, like, I don't know. But if you look around and you just
Are you
talk
thinking
to
about the
average
comments? Guys were giving you, like, a couple of guys gave you a hard time in the comments, and you were like, they're like, this guy isn't an expert. You're like, I didn't say I was an expert.
Yeah.
Like, you can't go in the comments. Well, you go in the comments, but you have to understand people are just jerk-offs.
Yeah. No, I mean, like, some financial bro is probably going to tell me in there that I'm wrong and we're not in a recession yet, and that everything's fine. Everything's peaches and daisies. But, I mean, like,
Listen,
look around.
You can talk to any real estate agent out there. They'll tell you, ain't nothing selling.
Yeah.
Like, prices are dropping, and they're still not selling.
Yeah.
So there's a recession. You can go in the grocery store. Go in the come on, man. It's a recession. Like,
No, I mean 100%.
Is it as bad as it's going to get? No, not even close.
Yeah.
But this is right now. They're propping it as much as they can. But at some point, there's just nothing else you can do, and things start going bad.
I mean, as the crypto scams see it, the rug pulls. I mean, we're going to see that in the overall economy, unfortunately. And I think we're just making for the perfect cocktail right now for shit to just hit the fan.
Well, there's always fraud.
That's true.
Yeah, that's
true.
what I fall back on. People say, "How are you so relaxed?" Listen.
Yeah.
I got it. I got something. No. Okay, listen. All right, listen. Oh my God, I didn't. Do you remember the sheriff's deputy that called me?
Yeah.
Or the sheriff's investigator? Yeah. I went and did that.
Oh, did you?
It was pretty cool. It was pretty cool. They were actually pretty cool. Yeah, I talked in front of like 30, at least 30 investigators with the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Department. I went in and was talking about title fraud.
Oh yeah.
So super cool. I'm actually supposed to do it again on the 28th. I'm supposed to go talk to. Anyway, a whole nother subject. Anyway, very cool, right? It was pretty cool. And I was really I couldn't believe how nervous I was when I walked in because I was like, oh wow, these guys really hate me. Usually when I go, it's brokers, and most of them like me. Like they think they've seen my stuff. I kind of know they already kind of think they know what I did. Yeah. They're like, wow, they're kind of impressed.
Like
I thought,
respect it kind of thing.
These guys are going to hate my guts.
Yeah.
But after about 10 minutes, I was like, oh, they're all right. Like they're giggling and laughing and smiling. I felt much more comfortable. But initially, I was like I've spoken in front of 300-400 people.
Yeah.
But I was never been so nervous.
You're shitting bricks out there.
Yeah, I was. I didn't even do anything wrong.
Yeah.
All right. All right, so I'm gonna wrap it up. Is that cool?
Yeah, that's fine with me.
All right, cool. We got to put your. We didn't even mention your. We got to put your link. We'll put the link. We'll put the link to Brandon's channel. It's Green Candle. Yeah, Green. It's a YouTube channel, Green Candle, and we'll put the link in the description. And I appreciate you coming by, and I appreciate you guys watching. Buy one of my books. I sell paintings on Etsy, and I appreciate. I also have Patreon. See ya. I don't know if you guys know this or not, but when I was locked up, I wrote a whole bunch of true crime books, and all of the books are on Amazon, Barnes & Nobles, Audible, they're ebooks. Check out the trailers.
Using forgeries and bogus identities, Matthew B. Cox, one of the most ingenious con men in history, built America's biggest banks out of millions. Despite numerous encounters with bank security, state, and federal authorities, Cox narrowly and quite luckily avoided capture for years. Eventually, he topped the U.S. Secret Service's most wanted list and led the U.S. Marshals, FBI, and Secret Service on a 3-year chase, while jet-setting around the world with his attractive female accomplices. Cox has been declared one of the most prolific mortgage fraud con artists of all time by CNBC's American Greed. Bloomberg Businessweek called him the mortgage industry's worst nightmare, while Dateline NBC described Cox as a gifted forger and silver-tongued liar. Playboy magazine proclaimed his scam was real estate fraud, and he was the best. Shark in the Housing Pool is Cox's exhilarating first-person account of his stranger-than-fiction story. Available now on Amazon and Audible.
Bent is the story of John J. Boziak's phenomenal life of crime. Inked from head to toe, with an addiction to strippers and fast Cadillacs, Boziak was not your typical computer geek. He was, however, one of the most cunning scammers, counterfeiters, identity thieves, and escape artists alive, and a major thorn in the side of the U.S. Secret Service as they fought a war on cybercrime. With a savant-like ability to circumvent banking security and stay one step ahead of law enforcement, Boziak made millions of dollars in the international cyber underworld, with the help of the Chinese and the Russians. Then, leaving nothing but a John Doe warrant and a cleaned-out bank account in his wake, he vanished. Boziak's stranger-than-fiction tale of ingenious scams and impossible escapes, of brazen run-ins with the law and secret desires to straighten out and settle down, makes his story a true crime con game that will keep you guessing. Bent: How a Homeless Teen Became One of the Cybercrime Industry's Most Prolific Counterfeiters. Available now on Amazon and Audible.
Buried by the U.S. government and ignored by the national media, this is the story they don't want you to know. When Frank Amadeo met with President George W. Bush at the White House to discuss NATO operations in Afghanistan, no one knew that he'd already embezzled nearly $200 million from the federal government, money he intended to use to bankroll his plan to take over the world. From Amadeo's global headquarters in the shadow of Florida's Disney World, with a nearly inexhaustible supply of the Internal Revenue Service's funds, Amadeo acquired multiple businesses, amassing a mega conglomerate. Driven by his delusions of world conquest, he negotiated the purchase of a squadron of American fighter jets and the controlling interest in a former Soviet ICBM factory. He began working to build the largest private militia on the planet, over 1 million Africans strong. Simultaneously, Amadeo hired an international black ops force to orchestrate a coup in the Congo, while plotting to take over several small Eastern European countries. The most disturbing part of it all is, had the U.S. government not thwarted his plans, he might have just pulled it off. It's insanity, the bizarre, true story of a bipolar megalomaniac's insane plan for total world domination. Available now on Amazon and Audible.
Pierre Rossini, in the 1990s, was a 20-something-year-old Los Angeles-based drug trafficker of ecstasy and ice. He and his associates drove luxury European supercars, lived in Beverly Hills penthouses, and dated Playboy models while dodging federal indictments. Then, Two FBI officers with the Organized Crime Drug Enforcement Task Force entered the picture. Dirty agents willing to fix cases and identify informants. Suddenly, two of Rossini's associates, confidential informants working with federal law enforcement, were murdered. Everyone pointed to Rossini. As his co-defendants prepared for trial, U.S. Attorney Robert Mueller sat down to debrief Rossini at Leavenworth Penitentiary, and another story emerged. A tale of FBI corruption and complicity in murder. You see, Pierre Rossini knew something that no one else knew. The truth. And Robert Mueller and the federal government have been covering it up to this very day. Devil Exposed. A twisted tale of drug trafficking, corruption, and murder in the City of Angels. Available on Amazon and Audible.
Bailout is a psychological true crime thriller that pits a narcissistic conman against an egotistical, pathological liar. Marcus Schrinker, the money manager who attempted to fake his own death during the 2008 financial crisis, is about to be released from prison, and he's ready to talk. He's ready to tell you the story no one's heard. Schrinker sits down with true crime writer Matthew B. Cox, a fellow inmate serving time for bank fraud. Schrinker lays out the details. The disgruntled clients who persecuted him for unanticipated market losses, the affair that ruined his marriage, and the treachery of his scorned wife, the woman who framed him for securities fraud, leaving him no choice but to make a bogus distress call and plunge from his multi-million-dollar private aircraft in the dead of night. The $11.1 million in life insurance, the missing $1.5 million in gold. The fact is, Schrinker wants you to think he's innocent. The problem is, Cox knows Schrinker's a pathological liar, and his story's a fabrication. As Cox subtly coaxes, cajoles, and yes, cons Schrinker into revealing his deceptions, his stranger-than-fiction life of lies slowly unravels. This is the story Schrinker didn't want you to know. Bailout: The Life and Lies of Marcus Schrinker. Available now on Barnes & Noble, Etsy, and Audible.
Matthew B. Cox is a conman, incarcerated in the Federal Bureau of Prisons for a variety of bank fraud-related scams. Despite not having a drug problem, Cox inexplicably ends up in the prison's residential drug abuse program, known as RDAP. A drug program in name only. RDAP is an invasive behavior modification therapy, specifically designed to correct the cognitive thinking errors associated with criminal behavior. The program is a non-fiction dark comedy which chronicles Cox's side-splitting journey. This first-person account is a fascinating glimpse at the survivor-like atmosphere inside of the government-sponsored rehabilitation unit. While navigating the treachery of his backstabbing peers, Cox simultaneously manipulates prison policies and the bumbling staff every step of the way. The program: How a Conman Survived the Federal Bureau of Prisons' Cult of RDAP. Available now on Amazon and Audible.
If you saw anything you like, links to all the books are in the description box.